Hi, good afternoon. This is Defy the Trend Live, and I'm Nicole Havelka, and I am your mindful change coach. I'm helping you and your organization recover from and prevent burnout. Woo, let's do a little dance. This is a great thing to be working on in these exhausted and burned out times that we're living in. We're going to get right at it in just a moment. So grab your beverage, grab lunch or a snack, and we are going to chat. Today, I am bringing you a conversation that I love to have with people, and it is about the three most common barriers that I hear that people have that prevent them from having a meditation, yoga, or mindfulness practice. These are the most common things that I hear. And I'm going to name them and then talk a little bit more about them. So one, I don't have enough time. This is probably the most common thing. People will say to me, oh, I really want to do that, but I don't have enough time, blah, 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 fill in the blank. Okay. Number one. Number two is I don't have the right kind of body. People say that in a lot of different ways, but they say I don't have the right kind of body in a various ways. And then third, they don't have the right kind of mind, or people will say my mind, most often, I'm not focused, I'm too jumpy, I can't meditate. Those are things that I hear. So almost every impediment that I hear to doing a yoga, meditation, and mindfulness practice is some variation of these three barriers. And let me start by saying that most of this is not your fault. Most of it is because of how yoga and meditation, which is a tradition from India that spans centuries, even millennia, has been co-opted and culturally appropriated by the white West. And it mostly gets presented as yoga in particular gets presented as a fitness regimen, not as the spiritual practice and cultural practice that it is. So let's start there. And I acknowledge my identities. I am a white woman raised in the Christian tradition in the United States in the latter half of the 20th and the early part of the 21st century. And I carry some of that baggage, but I do my work regularly. And so when I do something that's wrong or not acknowledging that tradition, I try to do better every single time. So every time I talk about yoga, meditation, and mindfulness, I try to acknowledge now its origins and use even some of those fun Sanskrit words that I've learned along the way that help us connect, not to intimidate you, but to connect us better to the tradition. So let's get started with time. So one of the biggest impediments that people have is that, oh, I don't have enough time to have a yoga, meditation, and mindfulness practice, or the perception that they need to have a lot of time, or that you need to do it at a particular time of day. Let's just blow that out of the water here. Yoga is about bringing us together. Yoga is about reminding us that we are whole. So why would we limit ourselves to doing it at one time a day or at a particular time? So I encourage people to start with as much time as they feel like they can do or give in the beginning. So I'll tell my story of how I started. So I started my practice, I'll tell you, I started my meditation practice. And this was several years after I had been taking yoga classes. It actually was even after I did my first yoga teacher training. And one of my teachers said, would you please, for the love of all that's holy, because I was exhausted and worn out and all of those things, would you give me 5 minutes a day? And at that point, I was tired enough to try it. And I said, okay, Kara, I will do that. And so here's what I did. I did this for several weeks, actually. I said, okay, I'm going to get up. I'm not even going to get up and set up in some fancy space, I probably had a cushion at that point or something I could have used for it, but I didn't get out of bed even. So what I would do is wake up enough to get out of bed, or sit up in bed. Let me say that. And you wouldn't even have to do that much. But what I chose to do was get up in bed. and close my eyes and breathe. And again, and focus in on my breathing. That's all I did. So I just listened to my breath. I felt my breath in my body. I did all of those sorts of things. And if I do have recorded guided meditations on my website, if you want some guidance for that. And almost all of those guided meditations are 10 minutes or less, with just a couple of exceptions. But you can try finding that at defythetrend.com /resources, actually. So if you need some guidance for that, those are there. And there's lots of other places where you can find guided meditations. I would suggest doing that. Here's what I found, though. I intended to do it for 5 minutes when I first started. And at that point, I didn't use a timer. I figured that I would just sort of naturally be done after 5 minutes. And I found myself sort of in that space. And that doesn't mean I was focused. That meant, my mind was bouncing around, and then I would pull it back to my breath, and then it would bounce around again. And then I would be bothered by my hip or something. Something would distract me, but I would come back to my breath. And I was finding myself staying there 20 and 30 minutes sometimes. So I actually started using the timer on my iPhone, like just setting the timer for 5 or 10 minutes, concentrating on my breathing as best I could, and then letting it go. And that's how I started my practice, my meditation practice in particular. And I do a similar thing still, only I usually set a timer for 30 minutes now, and I will vary. So it won't be 30 minutes of meditation necessarily. It will be usually some combination of movement, meditation, and often restorative yoga poses as well. And I vary that. It's not the same practice every day. I now have the habit set of feeling into my body every single day when I wake up, and feeling in for what I need. And I decide what to do from there. That's probably not something that will be easy for you in the beginning, because for a lot of reasons. After you practice for a while, though, earlier, I'll say more about this into my yoga practice. Like, I just did one thing because that's all I knew what to do in the beginning when I started doing a movement practice on my own. So that's not having enough time. I would encourage you to do it any time of day. Do it in bed. Either at beginning or the end of the day is usually easiest. But so I know some people who will set a timer midday or sometime early afternoon, maybe around lunchtime, is a good sort of break time for that. I would count like short walks during the day. If you do that mindfully and without maybe not bringing your music or having the music on with you, do that kind of a practice. I would count that as well. But let's get on to number 2. Number 2, the thing I most commonly hear is that I hear people talk about how they don't have the right body. And this is completely a symptom of westernized yoga and meditation. And along here, I should pause before I get into the rest of number 2. Why don't you feel free to put any of your questions, comments in the chat about what has prevented you from doing yoga and meditation and mindfulness. So number 2 is that you don't have the right kind of body. So most often what I hear are things like, I'm not flexible enough. I can't even touch my toes. Touching your toes or whatever your range of flexibility is not the goal of yoga. This is a symptom of white westernized yoga, showing itself as a fitness regimen rather as a spiritual practice. Gaining flexibility is not the goal, though that might happen. Or some people might not think, well, I'm not strong enough to do crazy acrobatics, and I wouldn't call this even yoga, it's acrobatics of handstands of varying sorts, and arm balances and things like that. There's use for those in someone's personal development. And I could say more about how doing those kinds of practices were meaningful to me, but they're not requirement of yoga. And for that matter, yoga asana, which is the Sanskrit word for the movement part of meditation, is actually very simply designed to help prep your body for meditation. You don't need to do a handstand to prep yourself for meditation. In fact, Handstands are probably not terribly good prep for meditation if you're going to sit right after for it. You would have to do some other movement to calm yourself down into a more meditative state. So this should not be a thing. Your body is a yoga body, period. And there's so many variations of yoga poses, if that's really what you want to do, that you can make this accessible. You can do most poses seated. You can do all of the lying down poses if getting up and down off the floor is challenging. Use your bed as the place where you do the movement that might be otherwise on the floor. Use a chair when you need to use a chair, and vary use furniture and all kinds of things to vary the poses. And again, the goal is to help settle you into meditation, not to make you feel bad about yourself. Again, yoga is about making you or reminding you that you're whole. And if we're saying in some way, if yoga is communicating to you that you are not enough, that is not yoga. I will go on a limb and say that. So third thing is that my mind is too jumpy. I can't possibly do yoga and meditation. Well, here's the deal. I will say that my mind felt like it was too jumpy when I started this practice too. That's actually why I started doing yoga asana, because when I tried to pray or meditate, my mind went all over the place. But here's the secret that I learned, and thank goodness for teachers who taught me this fairly early on. Having a quiet and still mind is not the goal. Now, you might have moments where that happens, but really the practice is in the returning. We learn so much from those places where we get distracted and then we come back. And that is such a beautiful, I'm even calming down a little bit thinking about it. That practice of, oh, my mind is floating off there. It's worrying about this. Oh, wait, I'm going to come back to who I am and connect to something beyond myself, or connect to my higher self, however you want to think about that. So the jumpy mind is completely normal. We're not trying to get rid of it. Our jumpy mind is actually our body's way of helping protect us. So we're not going to get rid of that jumpy mind. But what we can do is learn how to return to ourselves, return to our practice, to that focal point, whatever we're using as a focal point in that practice, and come back to it. So I hope that this has helped you get rid of some of those barriers to doing yoga, meditation, and mindfulness. I can promise you, time is not as big of a barrier as you think. You do have a yoga body, and your mind is perfectly good and perfectly capable of meditating. Stillness, being perfect, any of that stuff, any of that crap that you hear is not yoga. I will go out on a limb and say that. So I would love to invite you, please feel free to join my community, either for free or right now. I'm in my open enrollment period for the Defy the Trend paid memberships as well. Join my free community, though, to start. You'll get a free yoga class and some free meditation downloads from me to give it a try. And that's at defythetrend.com/community. And you will find lots of resources, and you'll find even more resources available on my website as well. But this is my open enrollment period, and I give you all kinds of encouragement all the time to get over that hump, to use mindfulness in order to help you recover from and prevent burnout. And most importantly, help you know that you are whole and beautiful just the way you are. You are more than enough. Have a great afternoon.